African proverb says the child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel the warmth. What time in your life have you been closest to starting the fire? Wife was a senior staff for a local science fiction convention. Not only was she an unpaid volunteer, she had to take a vacation day off work and pay for her hotel room and parking. On the morning that the convention started, she was setting up the first of the 3 rooms. She was responsible for manual labor, moving tables, setting up shelves and loading them with stuff, and somebody came in, took her ID badge off her desk, and brought it to the convention's lost and found. Convention LF lady told wife that lost badges have a $5 fee to get them back. Wife looked at the badge, looked at her, and said, "Keep it. I'm going home. Have a nice convention." Wife was about 25 feet down the hall when LF lady caught up to her and returned her badge. I had a coworker at a non-commission-based retail job where a coworker would repeatedly sabotage my sales so she could get a lot of credit apps and a high GSP, AVG hour sales. She would overhear my pitch for cards, required, and then lie to the customer so they would apply. I would have to try and rectify what she said while she hovered over me. She did many other questionable things, and I reported her multiple times, as did my coworkers and customers. Now, one time I got lucky and an 18-yo kid came in, "Yo, buy the most expensive desktop we have on display. $2.5K. She saw me do this sale, but I needed a manager to approve a tiny discount, but my radio was dead. Coworker was watching me the entire time, so I asked if she'd call for the MGR. She stone cold ignores me. I go for the MGR, she prints out paperwork on the computer and tries to sell it to him. When I return, she literally yells at me in front of the customer to give her the sale. BC she worked too. I ignored her, didn't give her the sale. When I reported this, as did the customer, he was mortified. I was literally told by my boss, ignore when she does that. She's a middle child, so she does stuff like that. I was tired of the stupid lack of action, so I filed an HR complaint regarding her. And 5 of my managers for not addressing it. They all got reamed for it. Only one is still in a management position, the rest were eventually demoted or laid off. I was raised in a cult. There were 11 kids, with 4 moms, and the leader had really convinced our moms that he was the Archangel Michael. I tried to run away over and over in my late teenage years, hiking across the desert in the dark to get to the highway, where I would try to hitch a ride. Every single time, well-intentioned truckers called the police to report a little girl walking along the highway with her thumb out. I am short, and I had been malnourished my entire childhood, so even after I turned 18, I was underdeveloped and couldn't convince anyone I was an adult. Michael always called me in as a runaway and the cops would take me back. The last time, I was 20, and I felt so hopeless when I saw the police lights. I thought very seriously about trying to attack the officer with my knife that I always brought in case I was picked up by a crazy person. I knew I was too small and weak to actually hurt the officer, but he would be obliged to arrest me and send me to jail. It was the only way out I could think of. Sorry, I was in a hurry because my husband was waiting for me to watch a show with him. I answered the question, more or less, and didn't think people would be very interested to hear the rest. I never tried to use the knife on the officer. It was the only way out that I could think of. But I was afraid I might accidentally actually hurt him, or he'd hurt me, and I couldn't find the courage. I just gave up. I sat in his backseat and cried until I got home, and just quit trying to escape for at least 8 or 9 months. The biggest problem with trying to escape was no ID to prove my age. The next biggest problem was money. I was going to college on a Pell Grant, and was working at the college as a work-study. Michael would have us sign over our checks, because we didn't need the money when he was supporting us, and we couldn't cash the checks without photo ID anyway. And he wouldn't let us learn to drive, because that would have given us a literal key to independence. Over the course of almost 2 years, my boss at my work-study job got the truth of my home situation out of me, and she helped me figure out what to do. She told me which documents I would need to find and get hold of to get photo ID. Then when I had my birth certificate and SS card, she drove me to the DMV to get an ID. She also hired me for a second job there at the college, tutoring, so I was teaching adults to read and teaching Braille to the newly blind, during every free hour of my day. Michael never knew about that job. Every 2 weeks, I'd give Michael my check from the one job, and my boss would take me to cash the other. She also helped me set up a bank account, and taught me to drive. I found 2 sisters who were willing to take me in as a roommate, and I had enough income to pay my portion of the rent. One of the sisters drove out to Michael's property to pick me up, and Michael called me in as a runaway, expecting it to go as it always had. But that time, I had proof of my age, and I was nearly 21 by that time. Edit. To clarify a few things I keep being asked about, it was a poor community. College in Arizona in the late 90s. So small that they had to have many campuses in small towns over about a quarter of the state. We didn't have student IDs. The high school in the town where I graduated got photo student IDs sooner than the college did, though both were after I was done there. My mom filled out my FAFSA paperwork, W-4s, etc. She had my birth certificate and SS card. She didn't need photo ID for that stuff. Once we turned 18, they couldn't collect welfare for us anymore, and sending us to college on the government's dime while we did work-study jobs was lucrative for them. It still didn't leave me any way to prove my age in the middle of the night, at the side of a highway, when cops would ask for ID I didn't have, when they had a report of a runaway teen matching my description. As to how we got to and from the college, one of the mothers drove us everywhere. She was the only one allowed to drive. That's why I was at the college long enough hours to have a second job Michael didn't know about. We would pile into the vehicle and arrive there at 7 o'clock am, when the earliest classes started, and all leave together at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock p.m., depending on our class schedules for that semester. I can't really answer the question about why I never ran away from the college itself, and always ran at night. Part of it was that one of the few things the kids could do to get approval from Michael was to tell him something another of us was doing wrong, so the people who should have been my allies were constantly policing me instead. Also, if I left during the day, someone at the small college or in the small town would be able to tell Michael who they had seen me with. But I honestly don't remember thinking about it very much, in retrospect I can see reasons I wouldn't have done it that way, but I can't remember actually even thinking about it at the time. It somehow just never occurred to me. I guess mostly it was just that nighttime felt safe and secret, and daytime felt exposed. Dumped at the doorstep of a youth shelter after my mum was hospitalized and dad was in prison. I wasn't a super bright teenager, but had enough sense to spend my last $20 on pepper spray and padlocks for my stuff. Predictably, people's stuff went missing all the time. I could write an essay on the issues in the public welfare system, ranging from the macro level, lack of funding, to the micro level, incompetent or burned out staff. There was violence, substance use, and sexual assault in crisis accommodation. But what bothers me 10 years later is the sheer stupidity of some adults who are meant to guide at-risk teenagers. I would ask my social worker questions like, are there places which can help me with food this week? How do I write a resume? And that social worker would vaguely shrug and offer relaxation techniques and mindfulness strategies. Look, 3 people got arrested at this shelter last week. No amount of relaxation techniques are going to calm me down. I'm guilty of doing stupid and irresponsible things as a teenager, but eventually finished high school and then 3 university degrees. I actually work for the same system that I was and am disappointed in, and there are so many practical resources available. They're underutilized because staff don't even know they're out there. If I had just a single adult to help me with the most simple tasks as a kid, it would have been so much easier. When you're a kid you just don't know how university loan applications, taxes, budgeting, etc. works. Or at least I didn't. And everybody assumes that you do, because they do. I had no idea that in my country, the Department of Housing can pay for your rental bond. I stayed in a homeless shelter for an extra 1 to 2 months to save up $900 to pay for the bond of a shitty apartment. Extra months of broken sleep, men trying to pick the lock to my door, residents hyped up on ice. Last year there was a 16-year-old girl on the train, having a meltdown and making a public scene. She was clearly drunk and people were avoiding her. She started screaming that she missed her period and does anybody want to pay for her termination. She phrased it as a joke or a way to get money, which I did not give. But I guess she repeated it enough that I wondered if it was true. We got to talking and I referred her to a social service, downloaded a list of resources in her catchment area, and saved links and forms on her phone about how to arrange her own healthcare card since she's over 15, so that she can visit a bulk billing GP on her own and get tested. In my country, the P-test from a pharmacy is about $15, but a pregnancy blood test ordered by your GP is free. We discussed different options that her GP might outline and other things that might be helpful. I know as well as anyone else that it's not always that straightforward, especially with 30 patients in your caseload and juggling them with a million other priorities. But in the biopsychosocial framework of health, where biological, psychological, and social factors are proposed to impact physical and mental health, we severely underestimate the impact of social circumstances. We let these kids down all the time, and it's preventable. I used to work in fast food, and was the only person in the store that didn't smoke. Everyone else got to take a break to smoke, but since I didn't smoke, I wasn't allowed to. Eventually, I spoke to the owner about it and was rebuffed, so I went over their heads to the company board. Owner got his ass chewed out for rebuffing me, and I wound up getting a huge bonus my next paycheck. But when they discovered I reported them, I got fired immediately. Turns out they'd been violating company policy in food prep and storage, so I filed another report to corporate. Store got shut down for months and my former boss got fined 6 figures. When I was a kid, my dad used to beat on me pretty often. When he was sober, I usually did something to deserve it. When he wasn't, it was just go time. One night, I was 14. He got drunk, and when I got home from a girlfriend's place, he cornered me and put a revolver to my head. He told me how worthless I was and that he would be doing me a favor by killing me. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just waited for him to pull the trigger. He didn't. He left my room and left the revolver on my dresser as he walked out. I took the revolver and went out. I walked around my hometown, sat by the river, and thought about all the ways I could get back at him for all the misery he caused my mother, sister, and I. I also considered doing the old Kurt Cobain, but that's not relevant. I took the weapon apart and threw its pieces in the river. No one's asked me about the gun since. It's probably still there. Edit. Holy shit, that blew up. Thanks for all the upvotes and awards, everyone. I can absolutely attest to being around people who are love-starved and then subsequently self-sabotaging or otherwise destructive. In a softer sense, if I have felt rejected, I have felt peace in sort of burning bridges to find myself. May the bridges you burn light the way forward. May the bridges you burn be unoccupied and devoid of structural necessity. When I had been bullied constantly in 7th grade by 3 different kids, groups of kids, and the school showed so little interest in helping me. I was physically bullied, verbally mocked, humiliated in front of the other kids, and not an eye was batted. When I finally took my mom's advice to make a scene the next time someone started throwing things at me, I did it. We were outside that day for PE, and while we were all sitting in lines at the start of class, a kid in the line next to me started throwing pebbles at me. I ignored it for a moment. Then when he kept going, I yelled at him to stop. I didn't care that people were staring. I wanted them to. I wanted them to see that this average height, able-bodied boy was throwing things at me, a very small and disabled girl. The teacher came over and asked what happened. Kid told him they were only pebbles, he wasn't hurting me. The teacher agreed with him and told me if I ever disrupted his class like that again, I was getting detention. I don't know what it is about some teachers, but the second they get put in charge of more than one child, they become absolutely blind to any kind of bullying, and if it gets pointed out to them, they think that particular incident exists in a vacuum and couldn't possibly be a sign of anything worse. I was 11 years old and suicidal because I felt so incredibly powerless. That teacher only solidified that feeling. I didn't grow up with the best family. There was a long period of time where there was constant fighting, and things often went too far. I didn't feel safe in many different ways. It all culminated to a point when I was 17, disowned, and about to get kicked out. But, my vindictive, defensive actions in the past made my mother know that kicking me out wasn't a good idea. I know the only reason I could have a roof over my head was because my mom isn't a citizen, and she knew I would have reported her for the crime of child abuse, which did happen, which would have put her residency in jeopardy. So, I guess I had to threaten to burn the village in order to feel the warmth of safety. Edit. A lot of people are assuming my mother is illegal, but she's not. I'm not exactly sure the mechanism through which she can stay in the United States, but she married my dad, American, and they got divorced. She can live and work here, but she doesn't have the full protection of the government like me. My family doesn't know that I've hit it big in my industry. The industry they said that you'd need superhuman talent or a lot of luck to make it in. I'm getting my finances and the logistics in order, and next week I'm moving out unexpectedly. The guys I've hired to move what few possessions I'm taking with me arrive sometime in the morning and my flight leaves in the afternoon. I'll leave a letter explaining that I haven't harmed myself, but they are not likely to see me for a long time. I've got my own phone on my own plan, a plane ticket, and a place lined up on the other side of the country. My family won't take it well since they thrive on control and conflict, and I expect the whole family to implode from finger-pointing and drama whoring once I'm gone. The church, group of churches, pseudo-cult I grew up in was very much this way. Didn't go to the right school? Shun. Didn't send your kids to the Bible summer camp? Shun. Your kid, spouse, family member, sinned in a public way. Shun. Not a married 20-something with 3 kids and actively a leader. Shun. Took me 20 years to see through the bullshit, and another 7 to finally truly feel free. I'd burn all that shit to the ground for the hell they put every person through. Edit. For those asking, I grew up in the Churches of Christ, a fundamentalist group mostly in the southeastern U.S. Very untwined history with Mormonism, though we actually influenced them a bit. Look up Sidney Rigdon and Alexander Campbell if you want the cliff notes. Grew up with an incredibly privileged but emotionally abusive family. I never really fit in. They would frequently gaslight me with so much, but one that made me feel like I was going crazy was that they all hated each other but would act like I was the only one to fight with anyone else and band together in that. I've moved out now, but there were many nights when I felt like I was going crazy and that I could burn that house down and not look back. Glad I didn't though, always a better way out. Edit. Wow, not a huge Redditor, first comment I've had with any real engagement. It's nice to hear there's other people who've dealt with the same stuff and still surviving as well. Nice to know peeps aren't alone in it. Stay strong, happy living. Working in public accounting as an auditor. 65+ hour weeks. Getting yelled at by clients for things that aren't your fault. Getting chewed out by your manager for being under budgeted hours for a client. Staying in hotels 5 days a week during busy season. Eating poorly because you never had time to cook. Let's just say one of the best days of my life was when I got laid off from that place, which opened the door for a great opportunity with none of the issues listed above. The time I was working at a psychiatric hospital and the CEO assumed I smoked drugs because I had dreadlocks. I worked hard for those patients and they trusted me. I shielded the hospital from nearly weekly riots of patients. After being unfairly judged and made to look dispensable, I almost set the inmates loose on the asylum. But then, I realized that it was selfish and those people I cared so much about would be punished for fighting my fight for me and basically would be the firewood for my fire. I actually have a story for this. So I was a senior that was friends with 4 juniors in a friend group. I wasn't exactly part of their group, but they seemed to enjoy my company. I was both the funny friend and the therapist friend. I helped them through their prom fiasco when they were at odds with each other. I made them food on occasion. At my graduation, they all said that we should get together as a group and do something fun and bonding before I left for college. One of them even says that she would plan a party for us all. A month passes by, I invite them all to see a movie. One by one, they flake during the week before the movie. I end up going to see it alone. Another month passes, and they've maintained radio silence. Over the next few months, I try to invite them to various events, and without fail, none of them end up being available. I ask them about doing something together, and no dice. All the while, I watch their Instagram posts of going to a lake and having a lake party, or having a New Year's Eve party together. Now, here I am, typing this out on Reddit before going to bed and waking up tomorrow to go out of state for college. Moved to a new town, and started going to a new church when Dad got cancer. Went to church and told the pastor to try and get advice. Pastor announced this to the convocation, and also told everyone that some lady's horse was sick. Watched the entire convocation console this lady about her sick horse. The convocation was in tears about some sick horse while my dad was dying. No one said a word to my family. Never been to church since. That's a badass proverb of I do say so myself. Working in corporate. Hey there, so, we see that you'd like to set corporate on fire. I'll be honest, champ. I always knew you had a drive to you deep down. But I gotta be honest, I don't know if wholesale fire is the deliverable we want to be focusing in on currently. You know we're currently spitballing here to really incentivize growth hacking, but the bottom line is that synergy and out-of-the-box thinking has always been our wheelhouse. We can onboard similar strategy initiatives, sure. But I was really hoping you were paying more attention in seminar last week because we really covered this stuff already. Burning to death in a screaming corporate inferno really doesn't demonstrate thought leadership or that make it happen mindset we're holding as our central paradigm. The stakeholders just won't swing for perishing and cleansing waves of pure heat and light until skin literally boils and sloughs off. It's kinda low-hanging fruit when we're always striving for industry best practices by and large. Just keep these points on your radar going forwards and remember, we're mostly interested in right-sizing more than asphyxiating on chokingly thick smoke and passing out before the flames wrap around you like a smothering cloak of searing pain and numb whiteness. Speaking broadly about the market, we want to disrupt the space, but we can't go boiling the ocean every B2B brainstorm. Just keep working on that 30,000-foot view and we'll circle back tonight. Speaking of, we need you to stay in late if that's okay. Perfect, see you then. When I was like 15, I got in a fight with my friend over something stupid. I went home and was shaking with rage. Full-on puberty meltdown anger. I was stomping up and down the hallway breathing through my teeth all hard. At one point I went in the kitchen and got a knife and started talking to God like forgive me for what I do to him. Lol fucking Nimrod, I am embarrassed when I think about that. Whenever I'm in a meeting and my suggestions are getting consistently ignored and I'm getting interrupted and talked over, I get the weirdest urge to prove I still exist by jumping on the table and busting out the Queen of the Night aria. Edit. There's a lot of good advice in the replies. I will say that in about 60% of my meetings this is never an issue, and in the other 40% it's an issue because of a few specific coworkers who resort to just yelling if confronted politely. Their managers have been made aware of this,